When you hear the word courage, what comes to mind? Perhaps a fireman pulling someone from a burning building or someone standing up for what they believe. What about asking yourself courageous questions? Well, there are four questions that I think take incredible courage, and they are crucial questions if we are going to live lives of intentionality where we are actually spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. We're going to talk about that and more today. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Life's K3. We have been walking, well, actually, it feels a little bit more like maybe a snail's pace crawling through the book of Nehemiah. But this is a lot like the Gospel of John. It is written in such a way that it is packed full with information. This isn't just a book you can skim through. I mean, you can, but you're going to miss so much of the richness of this book. It reminds me of Dallas Willard's writing. If you're not familiar with Dallas Willard, I highly recommend that you look him up. He is presently with the Lord now, but his work remains. And there are so many people dedicated to keeping his work available for people because it was so meaningful. And in a similar way, as we're going through this book of Nehemiah, it just has so much information in there. Well, we are still in the 6th chapter, but we are going to wrap up chapter 6 today. And there's some interesting things here that I want to point out. The first is that it tells us the month that the walls were finished. Just as a brief overview, if you remember, then the Jews have been rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem because they have been laying in ruins for over 140 years because of a previous destruction by a conquering king. And they are now being rebuilt. And it tells us that they were finished in the month Elul. And it's interesting because there's nothing that's written in the Bible that's like filler words. This isn't like a 10th grade student who has to write 1,500 word essay and they wrote 700 words, and then the night before they realized, oh, I need 800 more words, and they started filling it with a bunch of stuff. Yes, I have probably had that experience before as a teacher, and it kind of looked like, yeah, okay, whatever here. And that was before the days of AI. I can't even imagine what it's like now for instructors, but I digress. Let's get back to Nehemiah. What is significant about this month is where it falls on the calendar. Now, in today's Jewish religious calendar, it is the 6th month currently, and it is a month that is known for designating times of repentance and introspection. Those two normally need to go hand in hand. If there's a lot of introspection going on, there's probably some places in your life that you're going to look at and go, "Ooh, I need to work on that. There's some areas here where I need to change." And if you're doing a lot of introspection and you never come up with that, maybe you might want to kind of talk to some other people because they could probably, who know you really well and are also courageous. Because again, repentance and introspection typically go hand in hand if we are people of growth. I'm going to share in a minute about why this is significant in terms of the timing of this month, but let's talk for just a little bit about introspection and its value. You know, for the Lives Key 3 podcast, because I think it's so important that we are spiritually strong, we are emotionally healthy, and we are relationally smart. Pretty much everything in life tends to kind of fall in some of those areas. Okay, maybe not, your determination if you are going to be vegan or not, but pretty much everything else in life kind of falls into one of those categories. And in order for us to achieve all three of those aims, we have to be introspective people. And that does not happen by default. Nobody drifts to greatness by default, and nobody grows by default. If it's not intentional, you and others are going to suffer. And consistent, ongoing, intentional introspection is one of the greatest ways that we can avoid financial, relational, moral mistakes and blow-ups. It is so much easier to ask ourselves, what am I doing? Than why am I doing what I'm doing and how am I doing? Those questions are radically different. It's a lot easier to focus on tasks and projects and, okay, what did I accomplish today, rather than how did I show up today? And we need to do both, but we need to also focus, especially here in our Western culture, a lot more on asking, how am I doing? Not just what am I doing? I think that there are 4 questions that people of courage ask themselves. And this is a talk that I give, and it's especially helpful for high school students. It's a great graduation talk, but even just in a chapel or whatever, because these are 4 questions that courageous people ask themselves, people who really want to have genuine success, people who want their life to have a meaning and a purpose that is above and beyond just making themselves feel good. And it's these are the 4 questions. The first is, what do I want? Sometimes that's a dangerous question to ask because we don't want to say what we really want. We have desires, and we're kind of can be afraid that if we actually talk about them directly, that it's just going to bring up disappointment if we don't have those met. But it is so important for us to be people who have the courage to say, what do I really want? Not what is it that I think I'm supposed to want, not what is it people around me want, not what is it that other people are telling me that I should, but what is it that I really want? And if we ask ourselves that question in every aspect of life, that is going to open our eyes to tremendous areas of introspection and also, maybe some repentance there as well. The second question is, why do I want it? It's not just what do I want. Now that can be that's a courageous question, but asking that second question, why do I want this? Again, this means that we have to be courageously honest to ask and answer these questions. It's not about saying the platitudes. It's not about formulas. It's not about repeating what we're supposed to say, but it's really what we think and believe within ourselves. Why do I want this? The third question is, why don't I have it? And again, this is a question a lot of times that we skip over. It requires us to be honest and say, why don't I have this? And it's easy, to blame and to look at other people or circumstances or whatever and say, well, I just don't have blah, 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 because, but you know what? When we start asking ourselves these questions, we have to switch our mindset from blaming to ownership. And the last question is, and what am I willing to do to get it? The truth is that there are things that we can say we want, but when we look at how we spend our time, our energy, maybe even our money, that's going to be what shows up, what we really want. It's one thing, for example, to say, oh, I want to become more healthy. But what am I willing to do to make that happen? What am I willing to do if I want to be able to run a 5K? What am I willing to do if I want to be able to achieve a certain weight or whatever those types of goals are. And this applies not just in terms of our physical conditions, but this applies in every single aspect of life. These 4 questions. And we see throughout this book, it's not that this book outlines these 4 questions, but what we can see throughout this is that Nehemiah was a man of intentionality and tremendous courage. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to follow God. He wanted specifically to go back and to utilize his skills and his abilities and this opportunity that he had been given to see Jerusalem's walls rebuilt. Why did he want it? He wanted it both because it was a weight and a calling and an ambition and a desire that God had put on his heart. And we see that he does state that throughout this book. He wanted this also because he recognized that Jerusalem being in this place of desolation and ruin was terrible for so many different reasons. And I'm not going to take the time to go back and repeat all of that. We've covered that in the past. And then we can see that he has in some way or another, that as he's walked through this process, that he has had the courage, whether in an overt way, or just in a way of how he showed up in life, where he asked and answered these questions. And there were a lot of things that he did, and we can see that he says, okay, what am I willing to do to get this? I'm gonna leave my nice cushy job. I'm gonna travel through hostile country a long ways away. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna have to continue to confront all kinds of issues and all kinds of problems. But he knew what he wanted. He knew why it wasn't there. I mean, he knew what had gone on previously, so why Jerusalem had been in ruins. He knew what he could do, and he did it. Now, I want to go back for a second, and I want to talk about what I started with earlier, and that was, what's the significance of this month, Elul, when the walls were finished? Well, Jerusalem at this time and in the surrounding villages, which is where people live, they didn't really live inside Jerusalem at this point in time. They lived more out around the city. That doesn't mean nobody lived in the city, but the dominant number of people lived outside the cities in different small villages and farms and agricultural areas. Well, this month was the month that fell right between the time when the barley harvest would have taken place earlier in the year and right before the fall harvest of grapes and olives. So why is this significant? Well, the people that were working were mostly farmers. And the 2 months that they took to go and rebuild the walls meant that they weren't home taking care of their fields and vineyards the same way that they normally did. Their normal lives were very disrupted. So who was taking care of the farms? Well, most likely it was the women and children. And this might explain why we earlier saw in chapter 5, verse 1, that the women were specifically mentioned as having brought up the problem of the economic manipulation and abuse that was going on. What I want you to understand here is that God's timing is perfect. He cares about our practical needs. He knows that these people are dependent on their crops to stay alive. Now, again, this is a principle. It's not a guaranteed outcome. All right. We don't want to say that if we just follow God and do what he says, well, then everything is going to come together in our lives. Again, we're talking about principles. We are not talking about promises that happen in every single situation. The world and the way that God has established it, and then what has happened to it as a result of sin, is more complicated than that. Does that mean that God does not have oversight of the world? Absolutely not. But we're not going to get off into that whole discussion. What I want you to understand here is that God does care about our practical needs. He is aware of the needs and the circumstances and the things in our lives. And we absolutely can be mindful that He cares about the timing of what happens. This is also something that we need to see and apply as a principle for us. This is part of being relationally smart. It is to think about what's going on in people's lives when we have something that we want to ask from them. When Nehemiah came and he was asking the people to come and to step away from their fields and their vineyards to come and to work on these walls, he wasn't doing that right in the middle of barley harvest. He doesn't do that right at the beginning of the harvest for olives. He is considerate and he bears in mind what the other needs that these people have. We want to be mindful when we have something that we are asking of someone, whether it's a one-time event or if we're in a position that we have a team of people or we have family members and we want to put forth a major project and something that's going to ask them to disrupt their lives and their schedules. We want to be mindful about when is it wise to ask them to do that. On a very practical level, if you are heading up maybe a committee at church, maybe you're involved in women's ministries, it's not a good time to ask women to just put on this huge event in mid-August or early May. Why not? Well, if you have women who have children, that's right when school is starting or it's wrapping up. You want to be thoughtful about things like that. And that's just one very small example. But this is a principle that we can apply, and it is to be considerate of the timing. And when we ask people to give up their time, that we pay attention to what else is going on, either in their life or in the community in a larger way. And the last principle that we can take away from chapter 6 comes at the very end of this chapter, and what it details is these connections that people had. Poor Nehemiah, all this stuff that he has going on and all the other things that he's had to deal with, and he is surrounded by tattletales. Yes, tattletales. Those don't end when you're 5. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. A book that I'm reading right now details how an individual very high up in the government, this is many decades ago, and he went to work for another department in the government. I'm not going to mention what departments this was because this isn't the point. But the practice there was that someone would have their assistant, a secretary, whoever assigned to them, and their assistants were told that they were to listen in on conversations. They were to take notes of meetings, and I don't mean just regular kinds of things, but basically what they were going to do is they were going to spy on their bosses, and then they were going to report that information to their bosses. And so it's like, can you imagine working in a place like that? Some of you are probably shaking your heads because you're like, yeah, been there, done that, or maybe you're in that kind of situation right now. Well, that's the situation that Nehemiah is in. There are people who have connections with the enemies that have been taunting them, that have been trying to stop this work. And these people who are Jews, okay, so these aren't people who are coming from other nations. These are Jewish people, and they have all these entanglements because somebody has married to so-and-so, and then they have kids, and then all these different familial and relational entanglements. And Nehemiah just can't ever get away from this. And so people are speaking to him and talking about how wonderful these people are who have clearly been his enemy and not been for him. And then what they also have is they're listening to everything he says, and they're watching everything he does, and they're reporting it back to his enemy and the people that are opposed to this mission. Well, there's a lot of things that we can think about just from that. One is to be mindful of who we align ourselves with. Who do we get entangled with? Who do we have connections to? And to be mindful of the other people that are around us. Who are they connected to? And how might that be influencing their relationship with us? I think another interesting part of this is to say, if you're in a situation, or theoretically, if you were in a situation and the people that were closest to you were basically spying on everything you did and listening to everything you said, and they were reporting it, what would get reported? Is there anything in your life that you would hear, that someone else would hear, or they would say to someone else, and you would be ashamed or mortified or embarrassed to have reported? Now, I understand that if somebody followed me around 24/7 for like a week and recorded everything, single thing I said and every single thing that I did, are there definitely things on that list that, going back to our very first point, that I would need to have some inspection and repentance over? Yes, of course. But what I'm talking about is, do we live lives of integrity so that people who are opposed to us and opposed to the work that we are trying to accomplish basically would end up without anything of consequence or significance to say? That is something that we all need to practice. We've probably all seen, either from afar or something that we've experienced close, maybe in our own lives, where when people have not done that and the harm that they can cause. So again, what are we going to do? We're going to recap real quickly. So we want to think in terms of being intentional about being people of introspection, and also being willing to be people of repentance when introspection shows us, we got some things we need to work on here. Asking ourselves those 4 courageous questions: what do I want? Why do I want it? Why don't I have it? And what am I willing to do to get it? Also, to be mindful and appreciative of God's timing. That's something that we can take refuge in and comfort in, even when we don't understand it. And also to be relationally smart about how we ask other people to do things, and to be considerate of what they have going on in their life. And then lastly, it is to be wise about the connections that we have and the connections that people around us have as well, and how that might be having an impact on them and how they are relating to us. All right, my friend, that's going to wrap us up here for today for Nehemiah chapter 6. We will eventually get through this book, at least before 2024 ends. I mentioned earlier the 4 courageous questions talk that I have. That is a really great talk specifically for high school students, even college students, for a chapel service, for a graduation. But I also want you to be mindful that I have other messages that are designed to really empower people, to bring encouragement that's not just rah, 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 but something of substance. Because the thing is, none of us need any more yada, yada, yada in our life. If you're looking for yada, 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 all you got to do is pick up your phone, turn on your TV. You can find that anywhere. But when people gather together and they give up their time and they're going to come and they're going to listen to somebody, and there is still something to be said for that face-to-face, eye-to-eye, ear-to-ear contact that cannot be duplicated just digitally or over the airwaves or even on videos online. Those all are important. They have their place, but there's still something transformative about connecting with someone face to face. So I do have other messages, and I invite you to check that out on my website, stephaniepresents.com. In addition to those that you'll see there, I do take inquiries for custom topics, although I make a commitment that I'm never going to talk about something I'm not prepared and qualified for. Okay, that's going to close us out for today. If you haven't already, make sure to check out the website, stephaniepresents.com. Sign up for my weekly newsletter, High Impact. You're going to get some exclusive content that doesn't come out anywhere else as a subscriber. Remember this, my friend. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website stephaniepresents.com and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.